Hey, there we go. We're good. What's up? All right, so today's going to be a little bit in a couple of different places. I don't have one source today, and I'm going to refine this title, but I wanted to get this out before I move into tomorrow with the show with Bruce, which I am going to nail down the hour today at some point so I can prepare for when I'm doing the thing. So I'm talking about basically I'm doing the Che Guevara thing, which is why the Che title is here. This is going to be in the Che Guevara playlist. It should be. It will be if I didn't put it there properly already. So exploring Jansenism and atheist ideologies, right? Because that's kind of what that guy's comment. I'm completely going off of this comment and making the assumption that this guy knew what he was talking about without context, because when I looked up the word, I said, okay, he is this atheist socialist guy, the Che Guevara guy, I guess, right? But he adheres to it in a Jansen-esque way. Now, here's what's interesting. I double-checked on the timeline. Jensen, who does that IQ test thing, which synchronistically sounds like Jansen, and has to do with and has to do with an evaluation, a manner of philosophical standard for evaluating something. In one case, it's intelligence. In this case, it's grace, God's grace, right? And so that's interesting to me, because you have to understand, like, people don't just renounce God and then all of a sudden develop a new fucking epistemology, right? You have, like, while you are a child witnessing the world of your parents' God, you are developing an epistemology for anything that goes really far afield of anything that's a basic premise and principle of it, especially if you're taught of what God says we're supposed to do with people, and then you look at people of God not doing that, and that plus other things, because it's one thing to see another Christian and look at how you failed. It's another thing to judge the entirety of the whole thing based on the failures of quite a few people, right? But then there's what is doctrinally wrong, right? This gets to destroying everything that is a logical fallacy in a belief system, which it could have nasty consequences for those who don't want to hear the rationale, the reasoning, the new facts, the new truth that has been uncovered, right? It's this interesting way that the brain makes connections over time, right? And so ideas, which is why we see history repeating itself, even though it's only in maybe the 19th, 20th century did we really see secular and atheist things in motion, right? The church fell out of power in the way that we used to know it a long time ago. They still have a whole lot of shadow power, but the people on a lower scale. This gets back with the secret theory that the Roman Empire didn't collapse until the 1600s, which is actually around the time of Jansenism. Now, Jansenism we're going to start with getting into the deal with Jansenism. We're also going to look a little bit into the Lynch side of Ernesto Guevara Lynch, the one allegedly known as Shay. So, we're going to start. Jansenism started when he wrote a letter called Augustinus, which was him coming back to Augustinian philosophies, which branched towards the end of the first incarnation of the Roman Empire. You got the Roman Republic. Well, the second you got the Roman Republic, pagan Rome, Christian Rome. Then you've got the Holy Roman Empire, Holy Roman Catholic Church, or whatever that they call themselves. And so theoretically, Rome had not fallen, and that calling it fallen was a misnomer, and that for these what is it, a millennium plus, 1,000 years plus, up until this 1600 time period, Rome had much more direct ability because they kind of may use the church to pretend that we weren't a confederacy, because basically, all these kings had to have all of these churches, the ordainment. This is because of how Christianity took over the politics of the monarchies, which was part and parcel of mankind preparing to take things up a notch as we move into the imperialist era, which then gives way to industry, which then gives way to major capitalism as a thing, business as a thing, and people that aren't royalty in business needing to be honored for their services in countries that have monarchies with parliaments where the peasants, the subjects, have some semblance of rights now. And with those rights came these companies and corporations out of the people of the Karl class, the middle classes, that were developed, who had the most favor from these socio changes that had their economic consequences also. And thus, as we moved along in these things that, like, you couldn't just have a bishop come into a company, bless the company like a kingdom, and it works the same. It doesn't work the same. You don't need the man of God overseeing the man who may or may not have a relationship with God, who is in control of business that your country allows or has commissioned. This is how you're getting to that segue in the modern times out of Christianity, through these kinds of living conditions, as we started looking to science to answer the material world problems, because we were relying on the church to solve our spiritual problems through what we do in our material world. And so this gets back into all sorts of stuff. You'll see. So anyway, I want to get started. We're going to kick things off from the School of Life channel, which has, 9 million subs. So, fair use. This is 6.5 minutes for educational purposes. So this is their philosophy series, and this is 6.5 minutes on Augustine. I'm going to kick it into 1.5 speed. It shouldn't be hard to follow at all. Closed captioning, I believe, is on. Let's go. Hold on.
Augustine was a Christian philosopher who lived in the 4th and 5th century AD on the fringes of the rapidly declining Roman Empire in the North African town of Hippo. He served as bishop for 35 years, proving popular and inspirational to his largely uneducated and poor congregation. In his last days, a Germanic tribe known as the Vandals burnt Hippo to the ground, destroyed the legions, made off with the town's young women, but left Augustine's cathedral and library entirely untouched out of respect for the elderly philosopher's achievements. He matters to us non-Christians today because of what he criticised about Rome, its values and its outlook, and because Rome has so many things in common with the modern West, especially the United States. The Romans believed in two things in particular. 1. Earthly happiness. They were, on the whole, an optimistic lot. The builders of the Pont du Gard and the Colosseum had faith in technology, in the power of humans to master themselves, and in their ability to control nature and plot for their own happiness and satisfaction. Writers like Cicero and Plutarch had a degree of pride, ambition, and confidence in the future, which, with some revisions, wouldn't be out of place in modern-day Palo Alto or the pages of Wired. The Romans were keen practitioners of what we would nowadays call self-help, training their audiences to greater success and effectiveness. In their eyes, the human animal was something eminently open to being perfected. 2. A just social order. For long periods, the Romans trusted that their society was marked by justice, justitia. People of ambition and intelligence could make it to the top. The army was trusted to be meritocratic. The capacity to make money was held to reflect both practical ability and also a degree of inner virtue. Therefore, showing off one's wealth was deemed honourable and a point of pride, and fame was considered a wholly respectable ideal. Augustine disagreed furiously with both of these assumptions. In his masterpiece, The City of God, he dissected...
So, right there, that's an interesting distinction. Let me take this off screen a little bit. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bypass any issues that may come up getting flagged like I did with the longer movie that I was playing the other day. So right there, I'll look at this guy flaunting his wealth, right? And this was considered cool, right? Like, this is because that time in Christianity was still closer to Roman paganism. And so, you know, this is about the kind of Christians that are looking at a problem in the world and saying, man, we gotta fucking program the human condition. Right? We can't just let a guy be proud of his accomplishments. God. He's gotta give that to God. You know, so anyway. So this also, you hear this happening, like, you know, it's there's an eat the rich kind of thing, right? It's just like everybody loves a rich guy who is, you know, generous and kind. It's just like, yeah, we don't mind if you're rich, just don't have any fucking fun. Don't shine with it. Don't show us what you are epically able to whatever, and look, it's not that anyone cares, right? And for some strange reason, we had a lot of people that enjoyed elevating other people as ordinary folk, you know, so they, you know, dude, like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. You saw like the way a millionaire lived. Like, this is TV shows in the 80s, right? No fucking human beings like American fucking millionaires, millionaire up, like, lived so goddamn well. And and if you were in the if you were in the hundreds of thousands, there was very little difference between how you lived and how a millionaire lived, right? In all reality, because you could get a house, you could fucking use that much money to build, like, maybe you'd be pretty close, little, way less luxurious, you know. Costs certainly still matter, but you can still drop some money. You can still drop thousands of dollars on a repair if necessary. Like, I know, like, the entire economic spectrum is in this town I live in, right? The entire economic spectrum. It's very interesting that way, which is how I can have a show with Rod and Jules over there with Dana and talk to her about, like, listen, I'm a lower middle class kind of guy, might as well be poor, independently speaking, but grew up that way, you know, and there's the ultra wealthy here, there's projects here, there's everybody in between lives here. A lot of economic diversity in Greenwich. Anyway.
each of these 2 points, that human life could be perfected and societies were just, in ways that continue to prove relevant to us today. It was Augustine who came up with the idea of original sin. He proposed that all humans, not merely this or that unfortunate example, were crooked because all of us are unwitting heirs to the sins of Adam. Our sinful nature gives rise to what Augustine called a libido dominandi, a desire to dominate, which is evident.
So also right there, you listen to that. Original sin was not a predominant idea at that time in the church. Original sin, like people were having just this messy discussion this whole time. And, just, it's like you look at the politics of what developed as the ontology, the epistemology to the ontology of your experience in this world, wondering about this God you've been conditioned to believe you are separate from because you've been cut off from your feelings in some significant way, right? This is now at the time where the mythological heroism and ego-based cultural drive of the age of Aries had been finally washed away by Pisces, and the Pisceans are now here with these new attitudes. Right? So you're looking at Augustinian is here at the late tail end of paganism, where paganism is just passed into memory, and he's part of the Christian thought movement, trying to develop things for the whole of Christendom. As now now the new religious mythos is this far less pro-human endeavoring spirit kind of thing, the way Aries was. Probably even the age of Taurus, you were allowed to have a certain amount of that, and that was much more of a survival-based era, age of Taurus. Anyway.
In the brutal, blinkered, merciless way we treat others in the world around us, we cannot properly love, for we are constantly undermined by our egoism and our pride. Our powers of reasoning and understanding are fragile in the extreme. Lust haunts our days and nights. We fail to understand ourselves. We chase phantoms. We're beset by anxieties. Augustine concluded his assault by chiding all those philosophers who, in his words, have wished with amazing folly to be happy here on earth and to achieve bliss by their own efforts.
So what I was making the point was, and so Augustine's here at this transition point. Jansen is at this transition point between the fall of the system that Augustine is looking at coming online, and then you see people that will come out of this on the other side.
It might sound depressing, but it may turn out to be a curious relief to be told that our lives are awry, not by coincidence, but by definition, simply because we're human, and because nothing human can ever be made entirely straight. We are creatures fated to intuit virtue and love, while never quite being able to secure them for ourselves. Our relationships, careers, and countries are necessarily not as we'd want them to be. It isn't anything specific we have done. The odds are simply stacked against us from the start. Augustinian pessimism takes off some of the pressure we might feel when we slowly come to terms with the imperfect nature of pretty much everything we do and are. We shouldn't rage or feel that we've been persecuted or singled out for undue punishment. It's simply the human condition, the legacy of what we might as well, even if we don't believe in Augustine's theology, call original sin. Romans had, in their most ambitious moments, thought themselves to be running a meritocracy, a society where those who got to the top were deemed to have done so on the back of their own virtues. After the Emperor Constantine's conversion to Christianity, the philosopher Eusebius even proposed that earthly power was God's instrument for establishing Christianity on earth, so that the powerful in Rome were now not just privileged, but also blessed and righteous in God's eyes. What arrogant, boastful, and cruel claims, responded Augustine. There never was nor ever could be justice in Rome, or indeed anywhere else on earth. God didn't give good people wealth and power, and nor did he necessarily condemn those who lacked them. Augustine distinguished between what he called two...
Now, you see, right there, when, that's a statement from Augustine that I can agree with, right? But Augustine is part of, is also part of a determinism attitude too. That's gonna pop up. So, but I don't think it pops up here. But it's made the point of by Jansen. Like I said, this is a short overview.
Two cities, the city of men and the city of God. The latter was an ideal of the future, a heavenly paradise where the good would finally dominate, where power would be properly allied to justice, and where virtue would reign. But men could never build such a city alone, and should never believe themselves capable of doing so. They were condemned to dwell only in the city of men, which was a pervasively flawed society, where money could never accurately track virtue. In Augustine's formulation, true justice has no existence save in that republic whose founder and ruler is Christ. Again, it may sound bleak, but it makes Augustine's philosophy extremely generous towards failure, poverty, and defeat, our own and that of others. It's not for humans to judge each other by outward markers of success. From this analysis flows a lack of moralism and snobbery. It's our duty to be sceptical about power and generous towards failure. We don't need to be Christians to be comforted by both these points. They are the religion's universal gifts to political philosophy and human psychology. They stand as permanent reminders of some of the dangers and cruelties of believing that life can be made perfect, or that poverty and obscurity are reliable indicators of vice in the city of men.
Okay. All right. So, with that, you can see how those elements... See, we go through a psychological kind of salad period, and ideologies get, like, certain ideas have certain attitudes switched with different ideologies and different attitudes as they repackage tropes in human behavior through the psyche of the collective during these periods of time where the trends repeat themselves, especially if there's anything going on in the celestial cycles that are coming around in frequency for it, right? Like if you're in a year where Jupiter is in a particular sign, and that's a year in which certain other planets that aren't usually in that sign are passing through, you are talking about a year for that time Jupiter's in that sign, which is going to be not like the time it was in that sign 11 years ago, so on and so forth. So, we've done that. Now, what do I do next? I don't think I have, that's the only video I set up, right? I think so, yes. Alright. So, to get the right answer on... Yeah, we're going to go to this one. Hang on. Pull this. Put it in here. Bring this back up. Okay. Let me just resize this real quick. Now that I'm not on the YouTube, I want to make it so you can read it. Good. There. That should do. Okay. Jansenism in its context. This is from the Catholic University of America. The term Jansenist derives from the name of Cornelius Jansen from 1585 to 1638. A bishop of Ypres and former professor of scripture at Leuven. His writings contain views deemed hostile to the French government and the Society of Jesus. So, Cornelius was also doing this in light of now in existence is the Jesuit order, and they had a very strong presence in France, because France is kind of the foothold of European Catholicism. It's I think at the end of the day, outside of the Middle East, I think Christendom in Rome took off in France. And thus, when France became independent again after the Roman Empire proper, the Roman Empire historically as we remember it fell, they would have jumped right into the adoption of all these motifs along with their Egyptian motifs, the deliberate crossovers between Mary and Isis then would be coming into play and into focus here. A lot of people talking about how did the Gospels happen in France, right? Well, the French were just psychotically fanatic about it, the Christian cult, and part of it is recreational, right? People experiencing stigmata is a real phenomenon. But people like to recreate these things. They go through the suffering of the deity and things like that. Pagans do that too. But they do it to become less themselves. The pagan does it to become more themselves. That's the difference. His writings, so French Society, his Augustinus, published posthumously in 1640, is a massive 3-volume folio elucidation of St. Augustine's views on grace and free will. That third rail of theology since the time of Luther and Calvin, 5 of Jansen's theological propositions on grace and free will were condemned by Pope Innocent X in the 1653 bull Cum Occasione. The problem of law versus fact. I think I might have read this the other day. I'm taking it slow now and reading it, right? While many theologians and clergy agreed that 5 propositions were heretical, not everyone agreed that they could be found in Jansen's work. When required by the Pope or the King of France to sign the formulary, a sworn statement endorsing the condemnation of the 5 propositions in Augustinus, some Catholics resisted, especially the nuns of Port Royal, who invoked a policy of respectful silence on the issue of whether Jansen had maintained these propositions. Interesting. Port Royal. Among the first to be labeled Jansenists, the nuns can be considered heretical, heroic, schismatic, or merely disobedient, depending on one's historical viewpoint. Some see them as pioneer feminists or as just plain stubborn. But all agree that Port Royal epitomized the golden age of Jansenism, spiritually, morally, rigorous, cerebral, and genteel. Well, look, I don't think you can say that, because it was up for debate at the time he said it. It was causing a stir. A statement had to be made. It was a time where you probably couldn't be condemned if you knew how to diplomatically disagree. Obviously, these ladies knew what they were doing on that level, right? There was also in residence a male component to the Port Royal community, Les Solitaires, including Blaise Pascal from 1623 to 62, Antoine Arnauld, Pierre Nicole, and others who lived lives of contemplation, scholarship, and manual labor. An influential school was established at Port Royal, from which emanated books such as the Port Royal Grammar and Port Royal Logic, published in hundreds of editions in several languages well into the 20th century. So then we have, it looks like it's Galatianism right here. As Jansenism developed, it found an ally in the political ideology called Galatianism, a tradition of French ecclesiastical independence which dates back to the Middle Ages. This movement reasserted itself with the 1682 passage. Hold on a second. Of the Gallican Articles by the General Assembly of the Clergy. The articles stated that The French king is absolute in temporal affairs. The Pope is subject to a general council in spiritual matters called the conciliarism. Tradition limits the extent of papal power in France. Consent of the Gallican Church is required for papal decrees to be accepted in France. Quesnel's challenge. In 1692, an Oratorian priest, Pasquier Quesnel, who lived till 1719, published a devotional work entitled Le Nouveau Testament en français avec des réflexions morales sur chaque verset, a book that was credited with popularizing Jansen's hitherto obscure theology. Numerous editions were published as late as the 19th century. The complete work, filling 8 octavo volumes, Quesnel's book was even endorsed by several French bishops, most notably the Archbishop of Paris, Louis Antoine de Noailles. So, then we go to Vincent Domini. How much more of this do I want to read? Huguenots, right? The Appellants, and Roman Deacon of Paris, the Convulsionaries. Hang on. Refusal of sacraments controversy. I'm gonna read this last part about the refusal of sacraments, then I'm gonna move on because I have a few more things I want to cover here from different sources. Okay, the policy enacted by some anti-Jansenist bishops and clergy of refusing the last sacraments unless a dying person could provide evidence of orthodoxy, i.e. evidence that he accepted eugenitus or possessed a billet de confession from a priest of known orthodoxy, i.e. not a Jansenist, produced an emotional protest and numerous lawsuits. This was not a new church policy, but the specific use of unigenitus as a litmus test of orthodoxy was an innovation which became more systematic and a source of outrage under Christophe de Beaumont, named Archbishop of Paris in 1746. By the late 1760s, discredited by the lunacy of the convulsionaries and lacking the focal point for hostility once provided by the now exiled Jesuits, Jansenists lost much of their raison d'être and influence in France. Their role in weakening both crown and church was not insignificant as France drifted towards revolution. Right? So these attitudes also disrupted contentment with the monarchy. And like I said, we're talking about stuff that gets into things associated with Calvinism and things like that, right? So, so let's see here. This was done, okay, right? Birth and heritage, yeah, okay. All right, this one. This is the one I'm doing. All right. So this is from thecollector.com. Jansenism, the 17th century heresy that divided the church. During a time of Jesuit supremacy in Catholicism, a movement of theologians challenged prevailing doctrine. Harkening back to the Church Fathers, Jansenism was deemed heretical. So that's Jansen there. And then, who's this on the right, actually? It's gonna, with the illustration, controversy of the Apostolic Constitution. Wait. So wait, that's Jansen, but who's that? I want to know who that is. There's no context for who this is on the right side. Is it Lucifer with the horns and what looks like a thunderbolt in his hand? What is that? Is that like some heretic symbol? Oh, illustration of the controversy over the apostolic constitution. Eugenitus Source Open Edition. Interesting. Okay. Amid the chaotic fallout of the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church was feeling challenged on all sides by the mid-17th century. One religious order, known as the Society of Jesus, exerted outsized influence on the continent. And you see, with the Jansenism and the American colony situation, you can kind of see, there's not really a Catholic presence on the colonies. They're not under direct Jesuit influence. But in Hispaniola, in the Caribbean, they are under Jesuit influence. Because we're talking about Western influence on the North American continent versus the Catholic Spanish influence on the South American, Central American continent. And you can kind of see this Augustinian to Calvinist to Jansen kind of causality of thought that would accumulate in what would be, I think, the anti-Jesuits that we call the Freemasons. I think that's what we're looking at here. Which then may or may not have a direct correlation to what the game was happening in Cuba, as we are working on tying this to Che Guevara based on this one guy from this one film's commentary that I'm assuming checks out. Yes, I've not gone and done my absolute full-blown research, but I wanted to study this as a whole. Because part of the American immigration issue, which is uniquely different, is this. Which is the big difference between what will be the body politic thought process of those who are not coming from a Calvinist mind, that are not familiar as an Indo-European, right? You've got Italian Catholics and French Catholics and all the other European Catholics. Everybody understands that and gets that. That all is perfectly fine. It's a very different animal over there because the Catholic Church is appropriated paganism. Each church has its own aura that comes from the remasking of their gods. The church sought to push back against Protestantism in a multitude of ways, including through art. Now remember, we got Che Guevara over here with his issues with art. And I'm very interested now, like, I may want to take a peek at John Paul Sartre, because John Paul Sartre met Che Guevara, right? Because he's a 20th century philosopher. Yet it also witnessed challenges to doctrine from within. One theological movement posed a particular threat in the eyes of the church. Jansenism. Cornelius Jansen had argued for predestination, the idea that God selected certain people for salvation before they were ever born. The Jesuits vigorously opposed the Jansenists, whose members included some of the most famous thinkers in Europe. Jansen and Duverger, The Origins of Jansenism. That's Duverger. Quite the bald, bulbous-headed chap. Look at this. Look at this. This rock sitting on top of his eyes. But anyway, he might be, maybe he's Dominican. Maybe that's where the Dominican forehead comes from. I joke lovingly with my Dominican friends because Dominicans, you got big foreheads as part of your look, right? You know, and that's not racist because then Dominicans are also racist for talking about the way they look. You know, it's just like, I'm white. You're not going to comment on my features? Or is somehow the white man the only one who is featureless? I don't know. How's it work? You tell me how it works. Okay. Predestination and salvation. So, if we had to trace Jansenism back to a specific figure, Cornelius Jansen would be a good starting point. You don't say. Did AI write this? Jansen was born in 1585 during a time when his native Netherlands was under Spanish control. He started his studies at the University of Leuven in 1602. This marked his introduction to the debate raging between the Jesuits and the rival preachers. Crucially, Jansen would also strike up a friendship with a French peer, Jean Duverger de Hauranne. The two young men would go on to become leading religious scholars. Jansen served as bishop of the city of Ypres, while Duverger became the abbot of Saint Cyran in France. They kept in contact with each other until Jansen's death in 1638. That's kind of a cool picture, actually. I kind of like that. Anyway, I mean, look at, like, also just, like, look at this. It's not just sculptures. Like, there aren't a whole lot of people. I think we do have people that can still draw this well. Half the people that can draw this well are drawing for, like, Dungeons and Dragons and shit now, right? You know, that's where that kind of level of cool work goes. At the core of Jansen's theological belief lay the teachings of St. Augustine of Hippo. This North African church father who lived 1,200 years before Jansen and Duverger was one of the early Christianity's most productive authors. His surviving work includes City of God and On Christian Doctrine, which outlined his thoughts on core Christian teachings and how to defend them against opponents. In particular, Augustine opposed the movement known today as Pelagianism, which contradicted Christian orthodoxy. This movement insisted that the original sin of Adam and Eve did not actually taint every human being from birth. In his later life, Augustine endeavored to oppose Pelagianism and other unorthodox Christian beliefs on all fronts. See, which contradicted Christian orthodoxy. This movement insisted that the original sin did not actually taint every human being from birth. Right. Yeah, but Pelagians believe that there are human beings that were tainted from birth, just not all of them, right? So I can see why the Pelagian argument would fall apart on that level, right? Because the issue is that there is no original sin. It's just something to make you feel like shit about human nature because you're going to develop, you're not going to get everything right, know things, make mistakes. You don't have the allness of the God force. You couldn't handle the allness of the God force. Yada, yada, yada. None of that was meant to be a denigration. All right, Howard, thanks so much, man. You'll catch the rest of this later, I'm sure. All right. St. Augustine's theology was so important to Jansen that the church father gave his name to the title of Jansen's most well-known work, Augustinus. Published in 1640, 2 years after his death, the multi-volume book would catch the attention of Rome. I'm not going to read Augustinus on the air because I don't feel like reading that, and it's like over 500 pages. Look how long it took me just to read a little over 200 pages. The shorter I can keep my readings for the channel, the better. I've burnt myself out doing things like Carl Jung's Unconscious, and I might have a long book in me in the future like that, but it's not going to be Augustinus, I promise you. It's just, maybe I'll read it for myself and talk about it, but I just don't want to open my yap on camera for it. Okay, successive popes would brand Jansen in his writings as heretical, igniting a century-long controversy. All right, publication of Augustinus and the Pope's response. All right, so I don't think we have to get too much into the weeds here. But let me go towards the end and see what kind of marking on legacy we can talk about here. All right. All right, Jansenism in the 18th century and beyond. Perfect. Give me a minute. In spite of the efforts of Louis XIV and the Pope, Jansenism did not appear after the autumn of 1713. In fact, the opposite happened. Among lower-ranking priests, Jansenists' theology retained a widespread following during the 18th century. Jansenists were overjoyed when fearful European kings started to suppress the Jesuits. Right, so the question is, what is the Catholic Church without the Jesuits? Are the Jesuits the reason why you have certain Catholic churches the way that they are, right? See, now, I didn't know that there was this much, that there was a whole Jesuit resentment thing on this level. I knew there was something there. There's some very interesting stories I've heard about Jesuit missionaries. I've watched a very interesting Jesuit movie. I can't remember its name right now. From like the 80s, maybe the early 90s. So the Jansenists were overjoyed when fearful European kings started to suppress the Jesuits. In France, they took an active role in the crackdowns, which culminated in the Society of Jesus' dissolution in 1764. Okay, so that's okay. So I didn't know. So they had a dissolution because obviously the Jesuits are still here, and they dissolved in 1764, right around the time the American Revolution's attitudes have really cultivated. Like, the conversation in 1764 is damn strong. The inch towards secession from the empire. Yet, French society would change dramatically at the turn of the 19th century. During the French Revolution, many churches were closed or even vandalized. This persecution did not last for very long, but the new French state did seek to exert complete authority over the Catholic Church as the 19th century went on and the Church's direction changed, or organized Jansenism faded away. Although the Jansenist movement disappeared, many of its ideas would find a new life in church teachings after the Second Vatican Council. But that happens in 62, which is after Shay's death, which perhaps that's part of the point. During this monumental event in church history, the church made the use of the vernacular language official and strengthened the role of laity. The Jesuits may have outlasted their rivals, but in a sense, the Jansenists got the last laugh. Interesting. All right, so wait, I read, yeah, that's what I read already. Okay. The guy probably, he might have been simply saying that Che Guevara was a deterministic person. He may have been trying to say that he wasn't literally a Jansenist, but he was, but he was taking to an original Marxism Leninism in a Jansen as his Jansenist position, right? Where Augustine's position was like in the Christian world surrounding him, there was no sign of conservative values, right? So he wanted to start a conservative protest to the way in which everybody else is fucking acting, right? So these are conservative activists when you think about it, right? Because they're protesting how out of control everybody is. When you're protesting that people are out of control, you're a conservative. When you're protesting that people are under control, you're a liberal. That seems pretty simple, right? And if you do both, it just means you are your own person. So what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to get this information on Ernesto Guevara Lynch also. So we're going to segue over to that. In fact, I think maybe it'll be good to take a little break here. I didn't take a half an hour break because I didn't talk so much in the beginning. I had the video to play. But I want to take a little voice break anyway. So I'm actually going to pull this back up. And do I want to do another? No. Let me pick something different. I had grabbed so that was I did Whitechapel. I did Whitechapel for that one. The hate cult ritual off the last Whitechapel album, because Whitechapel went. I don't know. I didn't know you could go that hard. This album is ridiculous. Anyway. What do I want to grab? Do I want to do that again? No, I don't. Give me a second. Okay. Let me. All right. This is good. I just typed in the most ridiculous thing I could think of. Bear with me. Oh, okay. Okay. Hold on. I'm laughing here. So, I just said Vatican metal, and I'm trying to find just something, and I might have. All right, I'm gonna hit play, and this is called Ecclesia, Vatican III is the name of the song. Let's see if this is good. Oh, we may have a winner. All right. All right. I don't know. I don't know if that was AI or not. Because I've heard things. I want to double click on this and like, do they seem like they're real? This album came out in 2020. About. Okay, I guess that's a picture of them. 16 out of domain. The Vatican decided it was about time to relaunch organization. We got here. Dude, 2022. No, I guess they've been around since 2018 or something. Yeah, no, I guess they're real. That's interesting. That's cool. They were reddish looking monk cloaks on stage. I'm just like, and are preparing. Ecclesia are about to unleash world their second album and are coming to a church near you. Days, huh? Wait, so I think they're legit. Like I think they're like a Catholic metal band. I think I literally just played a Catholic metal band for you. Glorious for some. Witch finding metal of doom, offering compromise between heavy metal, doom riffs, and monastic chants. Right. And Dominique was the first year of the band's later record, their first album. Full-length album, Gorda Pestis, Boys in Red had to wait to hit the stage. Coming to a church, or are they just saying church because they're being funny? I don't know. I'm curious. They sounded good. They sounded pretty good. Very, very, like kickback power metal. All right, so let's get on with the thing I'm doing over here. So let me close that down, and we're gonna actually switch. Yeah, it's better if I switch. All right. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. That's right. I completely forgot about that. Boom. Okay. Hold on, where is this? Alright, I gave this a little bit of a run. So, this is from Catholic Family Podcast. This guy does a pretty good job without being like, all like, I don't know. He doesn't. It's not like a preachy thing. It didn't sound like a preachy thing to me. And he does this whiteboard stuff. I don't even think I'm not sure the whiteboard's important or not. We're gonna run this. This is a half an hour, but we're gonna run it at like 1.5, and I'm a minute into it where he gets actually started with the presentation. All right.
And I believe at that time it was considered part of Holland. But at any rate, he was a bishop of this city, and he worked for years. He worked on a book, and the name of the book was Augustinus, which is the Latin word for Augustine, Saint Augustine. Well, what Bishop Jansenism did was he went back and studied the writings of Saint Augustine, and he wrote a book on grace. So the whole purpose of the book was to describe grace, the functioning of grace in our souls, and so forth. And the question of resisting grace as well. Now, he worked on this for years, and he believed that he had found something in the writings of St. Augustine that was, you might say, hidden or hadn't been correctly taught through the centuries. So here you have the teachings of St. Augustine. The church understood them, more clearly defined them through the councils, added to them, and he didn't accept that. He thought, I'm going to go back to the original source, and I think that that his writings have been misunderstood. And so there's an element of pride there. So here you have all of the theologians of the church and the council saying that this is what St. Augustine teaches, and this is the truth about grace, these various aspects. And he's saying, well, I don't accept that, and I'm going to go back and read St. Augustine's writings and show what I think it is all about. So again, there's that little element of pride. Well, he wrote this book, and he died, I think, in 1638. But the book was published 2 years after his death in 1640. Now, when he wrote this book, he said, or wrote, one or the other, he said, I submit my ideas, my writings to the judgment of the church. So he had that attitude that he submitted and would accept the judgment of the church. Well, he had a friend of his youth, probably when he was in a seminary. And this friend also became a priest and went on to become an abbot. And he was the abbot of a monastery called Saint Cyran, C-Y-R-A-N. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Cyran, but it was in France. So this man, and I don't know his name, but he was the abbot of that monastery. And he promoted the writings of Jansenius. And there were condemnations. There was a condemnation from the Holy Office of the book and a condemnation of the Pope as well. But he didn't accept that. So he began to spread it in France. Now, he was influential with, or friends with, the superior of a convent near Paris. And it was called, a place called Port Royal. And this was a convent. And I think that's the name of the city where it was, but I believe it was fairly close to Paris. At any rate, the mother superior of this convent was a woman named Mère, or French for mother, Mère Angélique. And the last name is important. I want to make sure I have it spelled right. Arnauld. Now, this convent, Port Royal, had quite a good reputation because years before, when there was laxity in France, this convent, the sisters there were more conscientious and zealous in living their religious life. But she adopted this from her friend, the abbot of St. Cyran, the writings of Jansenism, and promoted it among her nuns. And their convent was quite well known in France. And it had a lot of friends, a lot of devotees, you might say, to that convent, especially her family, the Arnauld family. And she had a relative, and I don't know if it was a brother, uncle, cousin, what, but his name was Dr. Arnauld. And he especially promoted Jansenism in France. And I'll just read some of this from the book here on Jansenism. By the way, so the church condemned Pope Innocent X in 1653 condemned 5 propositions taken from the work Augustinus. And this man said, I agree with that condemnation of those 5 propositions, but I deny that they are found in the book. And he says that the Pope has no authority to tell me they're in the book, but I reject the proposition. So a very fine kind of splitting hairs, trying to get out of being condemned and having to give up his ideas. So I'll just read a little bit. So he made this distinction. This distinction was adopted by most of the Jansenists and enabled them to pose as persecuted and misunderstood victims, since they were willing, they said, to accept all the church taught and to anathematize all that she condemned, refusing only to swear a fact about a particular book, which fact was no matter of divine revelation, so they said, no matter of faith. In spite of all efforts of bishop or pope, the heretics refused either to submit to or openly leave the church. Now, in Holland, which again, Ypres was at that time part of Holland, the Jansenists were excommunicated. But in France, they, so to speak, went under the radar because they were always saying, oh, we accept everything the church says. But Jansenism was a much greater problem in France than anywhere else. It really only was prominent in France and Holland. But again, in Holland, the Jansenists were excommunicated. In France, they tried to pose as just misunderstood, persecuted, and they remained in the church and sowing from within. Now, if you've ever read the life of St. Louis Marie de Montfort, he was constantly being persecuted by Jansenists. But St. Louis de Montfort was a priest. He was ordained in the year 1700, and he died in 1716. So that was less than 50 years after the condemnation of Jansenism by Pope Innocent X. Pope Innocent X condemned the book, condemned these 5 propositions in 1653. So it was very prevalent in France, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But let me read a little bit more of this. It says, in spite of all the efforts of bishop or pope, the heretics refused either to submit or openly leave the church. By continual publications and insidious arguments, they managed to taint even those whom they could not formally corrupt. By artfully playing on the Gallican sentiments of otherwise orthodox divines, means theologians, and by rousing the king's jealousy of papal prerogatives, they managed to hinder the course of papal condemnation. So that while in Holland, the Jansenist leaders being excommunicated went into open schism, and therefore could be fought openly, in France the heretics claimed to be loyal to the church, and even when exposed and expelled, retained such influence over their former associates that scarcely any part of the French remained altogether untouched. So to understand the effect that it had, oh, by the way, I raised the convent in Port Royal, you probably heard the saying that there was a bishop or cardinal who went and had a formal visitation of the convent, and he came away saying, these nuns are pure as angels and proud as devils. Probably heard that. That was the convent, because they would not submit to the authority of the church regarding the condemnation of Jansenism. Now, I mentioned this Dr. Antoine Arnauld. He published a book promoting Jansenism, but the book was primarily on, I think even was a title, was about frequent communion. And he condemned the idea. And not only that, but he was saying one must be almost perfect to be able to go to communion. So even before that book, there were those that didn't go to communion very often. Now they hardly ever went to communion as a result of this Dr. Arnauld's book promoting Jansenism. So he took what was theoretical or theological errors and he put it into practice as far as the reception of communion. So this did a great deal of harm, and people would, again, hardly ever go to communion. Now, the part that I read mentioned, I want to put one other thing up here. So these propositions were condemned by Pope Innocent X in 1653. So the book was published in 1640, and church condemned it formally in 1653. And by the way, in case you're wondering the 5 propositions, I'll read a couple of them. This gets a little difficult. You know, many years ago, I was probably a seminarian at the time, or a young priest. I read a book called Prayer, the Great Means of Salvation and Perfection by St. Alphonsus Liguori. And it's a wonderful book, but about the first third of the book is on prayer, very devotional, etc. But then he goes into Jansenism and completely condemns it and exposes its errors, etc. But it's quite deep. Right, deep. So if anyone reads a book on prayer, you might get to that point and be floundering and thinking, what is he talking about? But St. Alphonsus Liguori was a great doctor of the church who really lay bare the errors of Jansenism. But this is, now what I'm going to read is condemned. This is some of the condemned propositions by the Holy Office and Pope Innocent X. Number 1, some of God's commandments are impossible to just men who wish and strive to keep them. Considering the powers they actually have, the grace by which these commandments may become possible is also wanting. Now, he says some commandments are impossible to human nature without unaided by God's grace. You could say that. But he says that the grace is also sometimes wanting. Here's another error. In the state of fallen nature, no one ever resists interior grace. No one ever resists grace. So you're given an interior grace, you automatically will correspond with it. That was condemned. Here's another one. In the state of fallen nature, to merit or to deserve punishment, we need not be free from interior necessity, but only from exterior constraint. Another one, to say that Christ died or shed his blood for all men is heretical. So that's condemned by the church. You could say that Jansenism was a form of rigorism. And rigorism means you have to do the most, really most difficult, but the most certain path you have to follow. And someone who's a rigorist will preach a very narrow doctrine or way of how to save one's soul. And it overemphasizes the justice of God and punishment of sin, and neglects to mention or to emphasize the mercy of God. And so this is interesting because Jansenism was condemned in 1653, formally condemned. Finally, it had already been condemned, but the final condemnation of it. Well, when did our Lord appear to St. Margaret Mary? That was in the 1670s. So very shortly after that, the apparitions of the Sacred Heart to St. Margaret Mary and the devotion to the Sacred Heart began to proliferate in the church. So you could see that that's the divine answer, you might say, because Jansenism, again, is a very narrow, rigorous idea of how to get to heaven, overemphasizing the justice of God, the punishment of sin, severity, but neglecting God's mercy and goodness. And so you see the importance of devotion to the Sacred Heart. I want to see if my notes, if there's anything I didn't mention here. Okay.
So once again, you can see he the way he even phrases that, you can see how you got the infrastructure to bridge the gap, and you can see how this rigorous narrow focus is akin to how Che Guevara was doing things, where he was even too extreme for Fidel Castro.
Okay. So this Dr. Arnauld opposed frequent communion, said that one must be almost perfect to be able to go to communion. Now, I want to mention one more thing about Jansenism. If you notice the part that I read, it said the reason why Jansenism really took a hold in France, and by the way, was a problem in France for about 200 years before it finally died out. But one of the reasons why it was so effective in France is because of what is called Gallicanism. Now, you know that back in Roman times, France was called Gaul, or in Latin, Gallia. So you got that G-A-L-L in the Latin word for what we now call France. Most of that was called by the Romans Gaul. So Gallic ideas are French ideas, right? It's just a kind of a word for French. Well, Gallicanism was condemned by the church, but it was the idea that the king of France had certain authority even over the church in France, regardless of what the Pope would say. So it was a form of usurping on the part of the royal power, trying to usurp papal prerogatives and papal rights and church rights. It had to do with church property, as well as like appointing bishops and things of that nature. So Gallicanism, which was condemned by the church, was an attempt to limit the rights of the church and ecclesiastical authority, and especially papal prerogatives, in favor of the French government, in the French king. And so because that had already been circulating in France over the previous century, when the church, Pope, I erased it here, but had Pope Innocent X condemned it, they felt this is like attacking the church in France. And because of their Gallican ideas, they resisted the rights of the Pope and the condemnation of Jansenism. So again, Jansenism was a rigorous idea, and it was basically, we talked about Calvin, if you remember Calvin, and then after him in Scotland, John Knox, both taught predestination, a false idea of predestination. Jansenists as well, because of their false ideas about grace, had a sort of, had a faulty idea of predestination. And you remember I read one of the ideas that was condemned was that Christ did not die for all men. So he did. All men were redeemed. Not all men are saved, but Christ died for all men. So that was denied by Jansenists. So that is really the main heresy from between the Protestant Reformation up until we get to the 19th and 20th centuries. Now, I want to cover a little bit more leading up to modernism in the 20th century. And this is not so much heresies as, I mean, it is, but it's philosophical ideas. In the 1700s and 1800s, there were a lot of philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, Thomas Hobbes, if I spelled that right, anti-clericalism. And it was, this dislike of the church and the authority of the church and the influence of the church. So these philosophers had a lot of influence on people. And one of the things that was popular in the 1700s throughout Europe was the idea, the heretical notion of deism. Now, to understand this, let's first define a couple terms. We know what we mean by...
deism. This is where we get into American ethos, the Masons, Protestantism, all these things that would lead into modern Western imperialism through the 20th century.
Atheism and agnosticism. So atheism says there is no God. The A is kind of like negating, negative. And Theis, or Theos actually, is the Greek word for God. So atheism means denying there's a God. And I remember something that Bishop Fulton Sheen said in one of his talks. He said in the United States, this time that he was talking, there are probably about 100 pure atheists, meaning 100 persons who deny God and believe, at least, that in their mind they've reasoned to that. But he said there are thousands of practical atheists, which means they deny there is a God because they don't want there to be a God. Because if there is, they have to obey his laws. So he refers to it as practical atheism, where they know there's a God, but they say there is no God because they don't want there to be a God. So atheists claim that they have reasoned to the conclusion that there is no God. But again, for the most part, they don't want there to be a God, because that would interrupt the way they want to live. St. Thomas Aquinas is one who wrote extensively on the proofs for the existence of God from reason. We look at the order of the universe, the beauty, the harmony, and think, how could this have just developed out of chaos and just haphazardly? There are many proofs.
Right. Even I agree with Aquinas as an animist.
Like that we could go into some other time. But proofs for the existence of God. So an atheist denies there is a God. An agnostic, on the other hand, says there probably is a God, but I can't know him. This comes from the word, you remember we talked about Gnosticism, which is a Manichaeism, which in the Middle Ages was like the Albigensianism. They claim to not know, to not be able to know anything about God. So an agnostic lives like an atheist. He has no religion, no reverence for God. He says, well, there probably is a God, but it's impossible for me to come to a knowledge of anything about him, so therefore I'll just pretend like he doesn't exist. Now, the deists, and I don't know who first started this, they kind of come from that.
Now, I think that a lot of agnostics had that attitude, but I have a feeling there were plenty of agnostics that just kind of, they may have probably just did like one or two small little things that made sense to them that maybe were secular in nature, right? Like, it wasn't necessarily a Catholic way of honoring God, but they did some little thing that was almost like you would do it with, like, a guy that was, like, I don't know, a boss or something like that. Like just on a lark of the heart kind of thing, right? It's a lot of it's a lot to have the meaning of God through the Bible and interpretation of the church dumped on you. It's a whole fucking story of mankind, and that's convincing you that what Adam and Eve did is entirely your business, and what happened to Jesus Christ is entirely your business.
Agnostic mentality, the deists say there is a God, and he created the world, but he has nothing more to do with it. Like, he created us, and he left us on our own, and just basically abandoned the world. So it's a denial of the providence of God, and also a denial of our duty as creatures to worship God, etc. And I mention deism because many of the founding fathers of this country were deists. That was their thinking at that time. Very, very prominent, very popular among the so-called learned classes at that time in the 1700s, mid-1700s, deism. So those are just several ideas that were circulating. And again, there were these anti-clerical philosophers who had a lot of influence on people. Now, another thing we find especially in the 19th century, was rationalism. And rationalism is the idea, it comes to the word ratio, is the word for reason. Okay, rationalism is, I won't believe anything unless I can understand it and prove it by my reason. Otherwise, I reject it. So in effect, rationalists believe that miracles are impossible, because a miracle is something contrary to nature or above nature. So rationalists reject miracles, and they, in effect, are like practical atheists. But it's interesting that Our Lady appeared to St. Bernadette in 1858, at a time when France was very much materialistic and rationalistic. The results of the French Revolution, the French Revolution was started from Freemasonic principles, liberty, equality, fraternity, and very anti-Catholic, anti-clerical, and rationalism was a big part of it. So I wanted to mention that. Now, all of these ideas coalesced in the mid to late 1800s into what the church calls liberalism. And the great foe of liberalism was Pope Pius IX. And I want to just introduce it. And in our next class, which, by the way, will be 3 weeks from today, because with Easter and Easter break, we'll wait till the week after the Easter octave is over. I want to talk about that more because Pope Pius IX condemned various ideas of liberalism. And then, to top it off, he came out with a condensed form of all their errors, and it's called the Syllabus of Errors. And I will talk about some of those more later. But liberalism was basically, from the mid-19th century up until the beginning of the 20th century, the latter part of the 19th century, 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, etc. And then from this came modernism. So modernism was the outcome of the liberal ideas. There's a very interesting book on liberalism. As a matter of fact, I got plenty of copies over here. Just show you one. Because we've used this in the seminary before. I really like this book. It's called Liberalism is a Sin. And what's really interesting about this book is that it was written in Spain by this priest in 1860s or 1870s, thereabouts. And he condemns liberalism completely. Really well done. Really exposes the errors of liberalism. And another priest thought this book is terrible. He's sowing division, etc. So this priest sent it to Rome, to the Holy Office, asking that it be examined and then condemned, because he thought he was, doing the devil's work, because he's so strong, condemning liberalism. Well, it was examined by these theologians in Rome, and then they wrote back to that priest and said, this is exactly what the Pope has said. This book is fantastic, and you are to keep silence about, condemning it, and it is to be promoted, etc. And the author of this book is to be commended. But if you've never read it, this really would be a good book to read, Liberalism is Sin by Father Felix Sarda y Salvani. And this is, of course, an English translation and adapted for our country. There are a couple things that I think the priest or the person who translated it either mistranslate correctly or leaves out, but for the most part, it's outstanding. So liberalism, latter half of the 19th century, and then that led into modernism. So
that was a good basic overlay, right? This guy, I think, did a good job. Like, I enjoyed that. This was a good presentation coming from this Catholic source. That gave me a lot of ammo to work with. I'm glad I didn't forget that one while we now move into the next bit, which, let's see, did I already read? Yeah, I already read Jansenism in Context. I already read The Collector. I already read all that. My bad. Hold on a second. I've given myself so much work to do. Okay. So, let's move on from the Jansen question here. All right. This is from this is a birth and family heritage for Che Guevara on Weebly that I found. So let me, oh my gosh. Let me try and make this readable on screen for you. All right, that should do. Control minus. All right, Lynch. I gotta keep. All right, I shouldn't have blown up the page so darn much. Okay, you should be able to read that, right? Okay, I hope you can read that. Ernesto Che Guevara de la Serna Lynch. I didn't even get the de la Serna till now. Was born on June 14th, 1928 in Rosario, Argentina. Now, he's born in Argentina. But he was born in 1928 in Argentina. That's interesting. So, yeah. He was born right around the time that the Nazis were picking up speed. He was born into a family descended from Spanish and Irish nobility. Che's father, Ernesto Guevara Lynch, was both Spanish and Irish. He was a descendant of Spanish and Irish wealth, where his parents were born in California during the time of the California Gold Rush. Che's mother, Celia de la Serna, was Spanish pureblood class people in Argentina. Ernesto Che Guevara, or Ernestito, as he was known during his childhood, was born as the first child to his parents. He was the first child of 5 that Ernesto Guevara Lynch and Celia had. Ernestito was one of 3 boys and 2 girls that Ernesto and Celia had. Ernestito's brother were Robert Guevara de la Serna and Juan Martin Guevara de la Serna. His 2 sisters were Celia Guevara de la Serna and Ana Maria Guevara de la Serna. So why don't they have Lynch in their last name like he does? See, that's suspicious to me. So it jumps to, that's to be expected. I just had a crash. I just had the entire Brave browser just crashed on me, including the chat room and the YouTube command center. So I gotta restore all that. I think I can hit restore. I've been lazy on memory with the computer, so I'm running out of memory, and that's probably why that happened. And right now I'm trying to turn it back on, and it may not let me, because I probably have to do that, and If I can't get it up, I can't continue the show. And I have to clear space on the C drive to make it work. Bear with me, I have to do this. Users. There. Downloads. No. That's not taking up a lot of space, though. No, that's not bothering me. Roaming. I probably have to uninstall something or some nonsense. Let me try it again. One more time. There we go. There we go. Here we go. Restore. Don't crash. It's working. All right, I gotta close things I'm not using. Let me close things down now before I have big problems. Oh, wait, that's what I wanted open. All right. All right, we're doing good. I'm back. I'm still here. All right. So, I accidentally closed the one thing I wanted to keep open. And I want to close a few other things. Okay, so let's close that. Let's close that. I don't need it. I don't need this. Oh, I don't need
Augustine
that.
was a
There, close that. There we go. That's much better. All right. Sorry, we're almost done. Okay. All right. And then history. Lynch family genealogy. Was that? No, that wasn't that one. That was birth and family heritage. That was the one. There we go. Okay, we're back. We're good. We're good. I just need to put it on. Hold on a sec. Properties. There. Sorry, guys. On with the show. So, like I was saying, Argentina. We all know about Argentina now, don't we? So, oh wait, this is birth and family heritage. Oh, right. Next page. That's what I wanted. Right. So I was going over his 47 education. All right, during his free time at university, right? So like he was some sort of Jansenist, but he went to this university, right? So he had a better education than how his nation turned out. His nation, he taught his nation how to read. He wasn't interested in making his reading nation excellent. He wanted it to be just good enough to throw off the colonialist. So he would get into the Marxism, the socialism there at university. So he even follows suit with radicalization, right? He gets radicalized at the university. Right? This is going to skip over a lot of dirt, and so we don't need to go into anything else. You get that this is all before his notoriety kicks in, right? So we're good on that front. So I found this site, Lynch Family Genealogy. Now this is really long. and it operates with a couple of different things, right? So if I squeeze that down a bit, there we have, this here is the Lynch family crest. He, like me, has the closed helmet. The Purdy crest has the closed helmet also. He does not have the checkerboard pattern on his. Mine does. He's got a lot of his the Lynch crest. Let me actually zoom back in so you guys can see it well. There you go. Isn't it funny that it happens to be the colors of the Ukraine? It's blue and it's basically blue and yellow. I don't think that's I don't think that's an accident. There's an animal on his head I just noticed. I can't tell what that is. It looks like a dog. I see like a dog. It's like a terrier or some kind. He's got these three-petaled plants on his shield. I don't know. They're not clovers. Anyway, let's see what it says here on thehousegenealogy.com. The Lynch surname is Irish, a reduced anglicized form of Gaelic O'Lonsay, descendant of Longsake. Are we talking about Longshanks? Is he a Longshank? Is Che Guevara a descendant of Longshanks? A personal name meaning mariner, from long ship. The coat of arms is blue with a gold chevron between 3 gold, 3-leafed clovers. Okay, so they are clovers. They're just my clovers. They usually look kind of like hardish looking, the leaf. And then there's 3 of them. The chevron design represents the roof of a house, which signifies the protection and faithful service. The 3 trefoils, or clovers or shamrocks, represent perpetuity or longevity. In Ireland, the shamrock was used by St. Patrick to explain the Holy Trinity and had Christian significance. The crest features a blue lynx. Ah, it's a lynx. That's neat. This is now a common surname in Ireland, but not all of this surname are related. One strain was first recorded in County Galway, Irish Gilama, and in the province of Connacht on the west coast of the island. This family, excuse me, oops. It's neat that they have this information, though. This family, where was I? Connacht, Anglicize. Chieftain in, wait. The cold, is province of Connacht, west coast of Ireland. I'm sorry. This family was originally called the Olonsechen, then shortened their name to Uloisai, and then anglicized it to Lynch. I see. Meanwhile, there were chieftain families in the countries of Antrim and Tipperary with the same Lynch surname, but who were unrelated. Another strain arrived in Ireland with the army of Strongbow, Earl of Pembroke, and were granted lands there after the English-Norman invasion of Ireland in 1172. It is believed that this family is descendant from Emperor Charlemagne. There's your French connection. Ding, 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 ding! We win. We win. We are winning. Are we winning, folks? So, this would explain... So, the Lynch family, they may have been, if not Jansenists, then Galenists. All right, this Lynch family settled initially in County Meath. And a branch then migrated westward and established itself in the early 15th century as one of the tribes of Galway. Anyway, all these means that if you're Irish and a Lynch and you meet somebody who is also Irish and a Lynch, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're related. Gotcha. So there's the Gaelic Lynch. Now I just want to oh, come on, where are you? You don't have a... There's nowhere to click. Okay, there's no menu to click on. All right, I have to try this. I have to use this search button. Let me see. Find. Do you have it? You do. Okay. Joseph House Jr. was born in New York. He became a teacher, insurance agent, married Nancy Purdy in Ovisenica County, New York. I have a feeling if this is happening in New York, this Purdy may be related to me. Actually, no, I guarantee it because of Purdy's New York. So, right, like I literally just found someone related to me on a lark looking for my name if my name was in here. So in Ovid, Seneca, Susan Seeley, Thomas P., Jesse Franz, William J. Myers died in Seneca County while his young sons sparked interest in family history, and Nance are buried at the Ovid Union Cemetery in Ovid, Seneca County, New York. His family Bible now lost to John House legend. So what happens if I click on that? That's I guess that's the headstone. All right. Questions, comment. So why was there so he just happened to have something for Lynch because Lynch was involved with all this? Because that's the contents. What is this? Family Bibles and scrapbooks. Dang. All I wanted was how do I get... Because here it is right here on House of Names, right? Let's see how they tell the story. The Anglo-Norman conquest of Ireland. Hold on a second. This probably doesn't fit the screen. Sorry. The Anglo-Norman conquest of Ireland, led by Strongbow, introduced the first non-Gaelic elements into the Irish nomenclature. These Anglo-Normans brought some traditions to Ireland that were not readily found within Gaelic systems. Hereditary surnames. One of the best examples of this is the local surname. Local surnames, such as Lynch, were taken from the name of a place or a geographical feature where the person lived, held land, or was born. These surnames were very common in England, but were almost non-existent within Ireland previous to the conquest. The earliest surnames of this type came from Normandy, but as the Normans moved, they often created names in reference to where they actually resided. Therefore, some settlers eventually took names from Irish places. Originally, these places' names were prefixed by de, which means from in French, which means from in French. This type of prefix was eventually either made a part of the surname if the place name began with a vowel, or was eliminated entirely. The Lynch family originally lived in some location which is no longer known. The original form of the Norman surname Lynch was de Lynch. However, there is also a native Irish family named Lynch. This surname, which they explain, here we go with this again, is derived from Gaelic words. So there you go. That's all consistent. Let me see. That's the Irish side. I want to know about the French side, because the French side is what this is telling me. Page shows only small French. What the French side? Lynch spelling variations. I don't care about that. Early notable Lynch families. All right. Lynch migration to the United States. This is not going to get into the offshoot of the Lynch that would become the family line for Ernesto Guevara. La Serna, or whatever. Okay, so. One second. Yeah. Because Lynch and then Day. So, like, you had all this stuff, and I just wanted to know. Bear with me here. I want to wind this out. Scroll down. What happens if I go to the bottom? Because he has this Lynch page, but what about everything? And he has the Lynch page. So he's got these house stuff that's happening here, but he's done all this other genealogy-based stuff. You know, it's just like, here's the Brunner. Very similar motif as Lynch. Again, another Templar. They're probably all Templars. Burns, Templar again. Oh, look at that. It's got Star of David and it's got the horn. I don't know if you can see that in the way the screen is framed. All right. Lynch. Whoops. Sorry. Noble genealogy. We're not going to worry about me for right now. No. This probably doesn't look right on your screen at all. Bear with me. I'll get it resized. I'm probably going to skip this whole bit that I'm doing right here. All right, forget it. I'm not impressed with any of these results. Oh, no. Cancel. Don't do that. There we go. Okay. So anyway, yeah, there was the House of Names here. I was reading that already. And then we have Eastman Online Genealogy. The Fascinating History of Che Guevara's Irish Ancestry. In 1929, a woman named Augusta Lynch de McKinley of Buenos Aires was in the correspondence with the Office of the Chief Herald in Ireland about the ongoing research into the origins of her branch of the Lynch family. The notes from this research, which are now in the National Library, state that the man she described as the founder of the South American branch of the family was Patrick Lynch, born in 1715, son of Patrick Lynch and Ines Agnes Blake. The family home was Lidichan or Lidician in the County Galway parish of Clarigal Way. As this research was underway in Dublin, the man who would become Patrick Lynch's most famous descendant was beginning his life in Rosario, Argentina. Ernesto Rafael Guevara de la Serna, better known to the world as the revolutionary Che Guevara, was born on the 14th July, 1928, to Ernesto Guevara Lynch and Celia de la Serna. 5 generations separate Che and his Irish immigrant ancestors who settled in the area, the estuary of the Rio de la Plata, now Buenos Aires. Their Patrick Lynch and his children prospered. There were fortunes to be made as the settlements grew. Over the decades, Lynch's many descendants were central to the development of what became the Argentine Republic. And the Lynch influence spread beyond Argentina. One descendant, Patricio Lynch, became Rear Admiral of the Chilean fucking Navy. Excuse me. This guy, like Charlie Kirk, like all these motherfuckers, was groomed. He was groomed to start a revolution that he was not meant to fulfill. All right. Oh, that was it. It's a shorter article than I thought. All right. So I found the Charlemagne connection there for you. I found a connection to me. Ain't that some fucking shit? Yeah. I'm excited. So tune in tomorrow. I'm going to have Bruce McDonald on, and we're going to kind of talk about how the influence of Western imperialism hit different outside of the Caribbean, outside of Cuba. With my buddy Bruce, who understands the culture a little bit better, being completely engrossed in their world. So it's going to be really cool having Bruce on again and having a new level of this kind of discussion. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.